We're speaking with Blake Brickman, former Deputy Attorney General in the Texas Attorney General's office under Ken Paxton. Thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Jack. I appreciate it.
So this week, you and some of the other whistleblowers held a news conference at the Texas Capitol saying your fight against the state, against the Attorney General's office is not over yet. What did you ask the Texas Supreme Court to do, and how confident are you that that will happen?
We asked the Texas Supreme Court, our case has been tied up for over 2 years by Attorney General Ken Paxton. We have not been able to take any discovery. He's made the legal argument that the law does not apply to him, and that is pending before the Texas Supreme Court right now. So we've asked them to rule in our favor and to send the case back to Travis County so that we can have a trial and we can actually depose Ken Paxton, so that for the very first time in this entire 3-year ordeal, Ken Paxton will have to answer for what he did.
And so the case, the reason all of this came to an impeachment level was because the Attorney General offered to settle. Isn't that right?
He did. His lawyers called our lawyers earlier this year and said that they would like to discuss settlement with us. And we did reach a preliminary settlement agreement in that case that was the basis for the impeachment. But two things never happened, Jack. We never actually entered into a formal settlement agreement, which the preliminary agreement required. And we also never got funding from the legislature. So because of that, we're asking the Texas Supreme Court to send us back to have a trial.
And that lack of funding by the legislature is what sparked the House investigation in the first place into the impeachment process.
That's right.
My understanding is that you were not part of the settlement. The other 3 whistleblowers who filed suit were. Why did you decide not to be a part of the settlement?
Well, this case was always more than just about money to me, Jack. I did not go to the mediation. There were 4 plaintiffs. 3 of my colleagues went to the mediation, and they came back to me and said, Blake, what would it take for you to agree to settle this case? And I said, Ken Paxton needs to apologize to us for calling us rogue employees. He needs to agree that the law applies to him and not try to overturn the Third Court of Appeals decision that when they ruled in our favor that the law did apply. And when Attorney General Ken Paxton agreed to those 2 provisions, I said, fine, I'll sign the preliminary agreement. But I never attended mediation, and this case is always about more than just money to me.
And so let me ask you, you did not win, your side, the House did not win its impeachment. Obviously, the Senate acquitted Paxton of all 16 articles. They dismissed the other 4. And so I'm wondering, why are you confident that you will win in a court of law as opposed to the impeachment?
Well, even Lieutenant Governor Patrick referred to the impeachment trial as a political trial. And that's very different than being in a court of law. If we're back in Travis County, we're going to have a judge that's very familiar with all the rules of evidence, who's tried many civil cases. And even more importantly, Jack, we're going to have a jury of our peers who are not politicians, who are subject to political persuasion. So I think we'll have a different outcome, but I don't want to be presumptuous. The Texas Supreme Court first has to rule in our favor and send it back to Travis County. But I think that when we have a trial there, that we will be victorious. There's actually a presumption in Texas whistleblower law that if you're fired within 90 days of making a report to law enforcement, there's a presumption that you were fired for that reason. And in our case, all of us were fired within, I think, 45 days. For me, it was about 20 days, but all of us were fired within that 90-day window.
You mentioned before that that in this case, they may, force the Attorney General to provide some kind of testimony about this case. What else will be allowed, do you believe, in this case that we did not hear during the impeachment?
Well, I think the big thing that we did not see during the impeachment is Lieutenant Governor Patrick ruled at his sole discretion that Attorney General Paxton did not have to testify. So I think that was a huge reason that we ended up with the result we got in the impeachment trial. But a Travis County judge we don't think would rule that Attorney General Paxton couldn't testify. This would be a civil case. It's not a criminal case. So Attorney General Paxton would either have to testify or he would have to invoke his Fifth Amendment rights in court, which is a very, very different from what we just witnessed in the impeachment trial.
And what about some of the other people? Like there was Laura Olson, his alleged mistress, who was not forced to testify. How helpful do you think that would be to the case?
We think it'd be very helpful. And again, if I don't want to be presumptuous, if we have a trial, if the Texas Supreme Court sends it back, we will call Laura Olson. We will call Nate Paul. We will call Raj Kumar, who is the contractor on Attorney General Paxton's home. And we will also try to call Senator Angela Paxton to see what she knew about this as well. We're going to try to get to the bottom of this, try to get all the truth out, full transparency for the people of Texas.
What was your reaction when, one by one, as Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick and the Secretary of the Senate, Patsy Squaw, read off the votes and, Paxton was acquitted on each count? What was going through your mind and what were you thinking?
Well, Jack, I couldn't actually watch the full trial, but I did testify and I was allowed to watch the closing arguments and I was allowed to sit through the votes. So I did both of those things. I sat through the closing arguments. I thought Chairman Andy Murr did a fantastic job of summarizing all the evidence. And then the very next day, I sat there through all 16 votes and watched 16 Republican state senators essentially condone corruption in our state. It was extremely disappointing. I think the precedent set from this case is very dangerous. I don't know why any public employee would ever report their boss to wrongdoing based on the results of this case. And that's why we're going to keep fighting, is I don't want that to be the story of this. We want there to be vindication. We want there to be no corruption in state government. I'm a conservative, loyal Republican who has spent 2 decades kind of fighting conservative battles. And I do not want to see the Republican Party of Texas become the party of corruption.
What did you make of the lieutenant governor really targeting and criticizing the House for what he called rushing this impeachment? He really criticized the Speaker of the House, Dade Phelan, and said one of the problems was that you and the others were never put under oath during this investigation. And he said that more changes need to be made so that the process, everybody who comes forward is put under oath. Did he have a point there?
I don't think so. I don't think Lieutenant Governor Patrick understands how criminal investigations happen. When you meet with criminal investigators, they do not put you under oath. You cannot lie to criminal investigators. And even in the Senate impeachment trial, we all were under oath. I mean, we all swore an oath. So I really don't understand why that's been.
He was referring to the House process because, there was no, the House members had to vote, pretty quickly after the case was brought to them. And so that was the process that he was criticizing. So what do you make of that?
That's how criminal investigations happen. When you meet with law enforcement officers and you report crimes, you don't always be put under oath. There are laws and rules against lying to law enforcement that apply. So I've never really understood this criticism about not being under oath, because if you talk to any prosecutor or any investigator with the FBI or with the state, like that's just not how these things are conducted.
2 other questions, and I appreciate your time. It was 3 years ago this week, on Saturday the 30th, that you and the others went to the FBI, the other former top deputies of Attorney General Ken Paxton. How confident are you that that investigation is still going on and that the Attorney General may face federal charges? He may be indicted by the feds?
Yeah, I really can't speak a lot about that, Jack, other than I can confirm the investigation is still ongoing. And one point that I would love to clarify for your viewers that often gets lost in this whole discussion about the investigation is Ken Paxton is out there telling people this is all a political witch hunt. Well, this investigation 3 years ago, like you said, this Saturday, can't believe it's been 3 years, by the way, started when Donald Trump was president. So Donald Trump controlled the Department of Justice. Donald Trump controlled the FBI. And remember, the allegations against Ken Paxton were from his 8 most senior aides. So the idea that this is a political witch hunt, when it started when Donald Trump was president, based on allegations that arose from Ken Paxton's top 8 people, is really ridiculous.
I was going to ask you about that because he blamed the Biden administration, Texas Democrats, and Speaker Phelan for this impeachment process.
Yeah, I
saying,
think that's just totally made up. I think that if you watch Tony Busby during the impeachment trial, no one's ever really defended Ken Paxton's actions here. No one's really saying Ken Paxton is innocent. No one's really defending what Ken Paxton did. It's always these sideshows of that it's, like you just said, something that's totally unrelated, something that's totally untrue. But the fact of the matter is, Ken Paxton abused his office for Nate Paul. And in return, Nate Paul hired the woman that Ken Paxton was having an extramarital affair to. And Nate Paul also remodeled Ken Paxton's home, which he covered up after he knew he went to the FBI by making a payment, by coming up with a doctored invoice. And all these Republican senators that say there was no smoking gun, I would ask them, what was that payment that was made months after he moved into his home based on an invoice that didn't exist at the time other than a smoking gun?
do you think the House did a good enough job presenting its case?
I do. I think if you watch Chairman Murr's closing, he laid out article by article, evidence by evidence, exactly the evidence that would have led, I think, a reasonable juror to rule that Ken Paxton is unfit for office.
Blake Brickman, former Deputy Attorney General in the Texas Attorney General's office. Thank you so much. We really appreciate your time today.